I think it would be wonderful and apposite even to bring the evening to conclusion, Tulsi, with you, particularly now that Dr. Peterson has brought our attention to this important concept of duty, sacrifice, and meaning with your much acknowledged and significant history in the military. I wonder if your personal experiences as a soldier and what we are beginning to learn is a degree of authority in this new administration, were it to be formed, might allow you the kind of purview in the military-industrial complex arena that Bobby outlined so articulately when it comes to big food and big pharma. Could you let us know how you will make America healthy again when it comes to the condition of aggressive foreign policy, which many of us are beginning to appreciate, might be to the advantage of the military-industrial complex rather than the benefit of ordinary Americans or Ukrainians or people across the world that are experiencing mass conflagration motivated by profit? How in particular, because I remember one of the best conversations I've had actually was the one where you describe what it's like when you become a congressperson, and like on day one they go, now you meet this person, now you meet this person, now you've got to take some money off this person. In a position of authority, how would you rein in, control, and oppose the military-industrial complex in order to make America healthy again?
I want to just thank you, Jordan, for talking about that link between responsibility and meaning.
The conservatives finger wag at young people about responsibility and duty in a kind of moralizing way, and that's a historical tradition. The opportunity that's in front of us now, and I've seen this, let's say, with my own audiences, is that the conservatives and the classical liberals could go to young people and say, well, you should adopt maximal responsibility in your life, and you can make that case on the duty side, but you can do it differently, and you can say to young people who are starving for lack of challenge that picking up the responsibility that makes them sovereign citizens will also imbue their life with a substantial and significant meaning that will sustain them through times of trouble. And I've found in my own personal experience, which is quite extensive at this point, that there is such a hunger for that message. You can't believe it. Like every single time in it's 1,000 cities, like, although I've been to many of them multiple times, every single time I talk about the relationship between responsibility and deep meaning, the audiences go silent. Because no one's talked about that for like 60 years. We have a crisis of meaning in our society. Why? Well, we don't have enough rights. We don't have enough hedonic opportunity. It's like, no, we've got plenty of rights, even though they're under assault, and plenty of hedonic opportunity. What we don't have is explicit connection between the idea of maximal responsibility and meaning. And that's something that the conservative types, especially these more revolutionary conservative types, a strange combination, can say to young people. It's like, we've got an adventure at hand here, people, and you can be on board with this. It's transformative. We have so much opportunity in front of us. It's unparalleled. And everyone can feel that with our technological transformation. If everybody picked up their responsibility and bore it as they were walking uphill, God only knows what we could accomplish.
That's the only way. That's the only way that we really make the kind of significant change that we're talking about. Bobby and I can do all that we can do, but we're just two people. For me, when I look at, and I get asked this all the time, I was asked this at a dinner last night by a sitting member of Congress. He's like, Tulsi, what are you doing? You're traveling across the country, you're in a different state every single day, you're out there campaigning, and your name's not even on the ballot. Why are you doing this? Wouldn't it be easier to go back home to Hawaii and, you know, maybe make a few phone calls or help out where you can, but why are you doing this? Each of us can find our own sense of responsibility and meaning, but for me it comes from a very personal and visceral place that is linked directly to experiencing the cost of war. As many of us who have seen and experienced the cost of war firsthand, we are often, not all the time, but often the first to stand up and call for peace, because we've seen that ugliness and that terror and that tragedy. And we've seen how our men and women in uniform are too often used as pawns by politicians who are seeking power, or by the military-industrial complex that's seeking profit with no care at all for the lives that are sacrificed in the process, and the loved ones that are left behind. In my first deployment to Iraq in 2005, I served in a medical unit where the very first thing that I did every morning was go through a list of names of every American service member that had been a casualty of war from the day before. We had close to 3,000 soldiers there from our unit out in Hawaii and across the Pacific, and I was looking to see if any of our soldiers were on that list, making sure that they were getting the care that they needed, getting them evacuated out as quickly as possible. But with every one of those names, feeling that heaviness and that stark reality of these are the people paying the price. I committed myself after that deployment and the next one and the next one to continue to find ways where I could personally be in a position to advocate for or make decisions toward peace versus war, to be in a position to exercise the kind of courageous diplomacy that we've seen in President Kennedy, that we've seen in President Reagan, and some of our leaders in the past who chose to meet with dictators, who chose to meet with so-called the enemy or adversaries in pursuit of the cause of peace, oftentimes against the interests of people in their own party and against the interests of the military-industrial complex. What I hope to bring, should President Trump win this election, is to help encourage that kind of courageous leadership, quite frankly, that he demonstrated in his last term in office. I represented Hawaii for 8 years in Congress. The increased threat from North Korea is very real to us because for a long time we were the only ones that were within range of Korea's intercontinental ballistic missiles. They have now far surpassed that capability and now have nuclear weapons that are capable of being loaded on these missiles with a range that can reach anywhere in the United States. But it frustrated me to no end that during President Obama's time in office, neither he nor his administration was willing to meet with leaders of North Korea, whether it was Kim Jong-un or anyone else in his government. And the reasoning that we were given every time for why they refused to engage in direct diplomacy to de-escalate tensions and perhaps work towards the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, perhaps work towards finally ending this war that is still continuing on. They said, we don't want to reward Kim Jong-un with a meeting. That mindset is exactly what's wrong with this swamp of Washington and the war machine. And so as a Democrat in Congress, when President Trump was in office and he went into North Korea and met with Kim Jong-un, I was probably the only Democrat that said, good. This is what leaders should do in the cause of peace. There's so many reforms that need to be done within the Department of Defense and the State Department, far many more than we have time for here today, but at its core, the State Department should be the leader of diplomacy and peace. And instead, what we have today in Secretary of State Tony Blinken is someone who is escalating war, who has canceled and gotten in the way of multiple attempts to bring about peace in Ukraine, and has now pushed us to the brink of World War III and nuclear war this week alone by advocating for longer-range missiles that Ukraine can use far and deep into the country of Russia, causing Putin to then make a declaration that they have no choice but to change their nuclear policy to the point where if they feel that they face an existential threat, whether it's nuclear or conventional, that they will have the authority now to be able to launch a nuclear weapon to address what they view as an existential threat. Now, if you hear Kamala Harris or the mainstream media or anyone talk about this, they shrug their shoulders. They say, well, we don't think he'll do it. Or, you know, we have nuclear weapons we can respond with. We have tactical nuclear weapons and strategic, all of these things. But they talk about these things so glibly as though a nuclear war is nothing different than launching a different kind of missile. completely denying what President Kennedy knew to be true, what Ronald Reagan knew to be true, President Reagan knew to be true when he said a nuclear war cannot be won and should never be fought. The same is true today. We sit on the precipice of nuclear Armageddon. Which is the most important issue that we face, because our planet will be destroyed in a nuclear war. The idea of having clean air and clean water and healthy food to eat becomes null and void. The idea of free speech becomes null and void. I'm doing everything I can to help elect President Trump in this race because he is our best hope to be able to walk us back from the brink. I have no doubt that he will meet, because he talks about it all the time. He will meet with Putin. He will meet with Zelensky. He will meet with Kim Jong-un. He will meet with anyone he needs to in order to work towards peace.
Thank you, Tulsi.